Today's episode is brought to you by the IFS Institute. We're excited to invite you to the 2024 IFS Virtual Conference happening October 24th and 25th. Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or just curious about internal family systems, this event is for you. Join us online for 2 days of transformational learning, dynamic workshops, and insightful talks from leading voices in the fields of therapy, coaching, and beyond. It's the perfect opportunity to deepen your understanding, connect with a global community, and explore how IFS can enrich you both personally and professionally. Grab your tickets at the links in my bio to let them know that you heard about this on the One Inside. Ready to elevate your meditation practice? Join my friend and colleague Locke Kelly for a free workshop on September 24th. Author of The Way of Effortless Mindfulness, Locke brings a unique blend of mindfulness, non-dual traditions, and internal family systems to help you break through roadblocks in your meditation journey. In this 90-minute session, you'll discover the 3 common obstacles to awakening and how to overcome them with compassion and flow. Perfect for meditators and helping professionals alike. Don't miss this chance for expert support and deeper clarity. Use the link in the show notes to secure your spot today. Welcome to Season 6 of the One Inside, an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm Tammy Sollenberger, author of The One Inside, 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about their inner world and who have a desire to connect to that authentic self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We were just talking about how we met in 2019. So do you remember what happened that we ended up coming together in 2019?
I think you had seen my webcomics online about IFS and you kind of reached out and said, hey, these are really amazing and interesting. I'd love to hear more about it. And I think you were the very first IFS person to reach out to me because shortly after, I think Dick Schwartz kind of reached out and said, let's talk about these comics. So you were where it all began, Tammy. Thank you.
There's a part of me that really loves that. It's funny because that's kind of how I remember it too. I saw your IFS comics on Instagram and was like, this is unbelievable. And then you sent me 2 of your books that you had done before.
Right. Books that weren't about IFS, just graphic novels. Yeah.
Yeah. Graphic. And when I never read a graphic novel and I was like, these are amazing. And I loved your story and I loved your art. And I just thought this was amazing. And you have a way of the way you use your art and your drawings and your storytelling. It just really is incredible. It's like you can, and you do this in your book. So we're just sort of jumping in. I'll introduce you. I'll introduce you in a second. But you tell a story at the same time, which is a fascinating story. At the same time, you talk about the work you do inside, which also teaches us how to do our own work.
Well, thank you. And I will say that when I first started drawing therapy comics, they were completely private, just for me in my sketchbook. And I was doing talk therapy with my therapist, and I would draw lots of little talking heads of the 2 of us and what we said to each other. And it gets kind of boring drawing talking heads over and over. But when I discovered parts work and started to draw the parts kind of inside me, and I would show them coming out of me, it's like, wow, as a cartoonist, I can really get behind this IFS therapy business. So.
Well, I am excited today. I'm going to back us up and say, I'm excited today to talk to Sacha Mardou, who is Mardou Comics on Instagram and all over the place now. And yes, Dick is a huge fan and he endorsed your book. And I know that you did some of the graphics for Jean's book. His wife her book just came out on burden eating, and you did some the work for her book. And so we have grabbed you up in the IFS community because I think that, we all just love what you're doing and love you. I mean, people don't know how amazing you are.
I feel like I've been so embraced by the IFS community. And it did start with you, Tammy. You were the first one to jump in and say, be on the show, which was very daunting because I wasn't a therapist. I was just doing these webcomics and it wasn't my job or anything. It was just something I decided to do and share and was experimenting with. And since then, I've met so many people and so many connections in the IFS world. And when I came to do this book, we reached out to Dick and asked if he would endorse it. And he was like, yes, and gave this amazing quote, which is on the front cover. I was in tears when I read that. And so, yeah, it has been a whole community thing. And for my part as an artist, I feel like the work that therapists do in private with their clients, it's secret, right? People don't share this stuff. And yet the work that therapists do is like life-changing and profound. And the fact that I could like shine a light on that with my comics, all I had to do is tell my own story and be okay with that. But what a gift to the world, because I feel like the work of therapists is not really fully understood, you know? So it's my love letter to therapy. So thank you to all the therapists and the work you do, because it really has changed my life.
Oh, I love that.
And other people's.
When we talked in 2019, we were just talking about this, that my son was in 3rd grade, your daughter was in 5th, and now my son is in 8th grade, and yours is in 10th. I can't do math. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was right before the pandemic. I mean, we didn't know how much the world was going to change. My daughter never got to finish 5th grade. She never went back to school again, you know, so big changes.
Yeah. And you were working at the library.
I was, yeah. And during the pandemic, the library like closed completely for a while, as a lot of them did over the country and across the world. Yeah. And when we reopened again, it was before vaccines. We didn't have PPE, and it felt like such a dangerous environment. And one of my coworkers got very sick with COVID, and we were all kind of exposed, working in close quarters. And so, yeah, I ended up not going back, and I really had to sort of pursue comics. It's like, well, this is what I want to do with my life. Maybe it's a sign that I can focus on that for a while. And sure enough, this book came into being, the book of my therapy journey. It's called Past Tense in the background there. Yeah. And yeah, I wanted to take all the webcomics that I'd made of like, you know, these little snippets, these little vignettes from therapy. And I really wanted to go back to the beginning and tell the whole story of like how I entered therapy, what the journey was like, and how it finished, you know. And I did finish, I think it was during COVID that I had my last therapy session, which I talk about in the book. And so, yeah, putting this all together chronologically and showing how IFS really turned my therapy journey around and really accelerated and changed my therapy journey. That's a big part of the book.
You do this amazing job of the book. Unfortunately, this is one of those books that if you think that you're just going to sit down and just read it for like a few minutes, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to cancel what you're doing. I just like gobbled it up. And then I was like, last night I was like, I'm just going to read a little bit. And then like an hour and a half later, like, oh,
thank you.
It's that good. It's that good.
Thank you.
And so let's see. I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to hear more about, you know, I know so much of your story just from following you and reading your book. And I guess, you know, what would be important to share about your story, or what feels important to share?
I think the fact that the book is not just about my personal healing, it included everybody around me, because when you kind of engage with self-energy, which when you do IFS therapy, you're going to meet yourself and that's going to change things. So many of the patterns in my relationships, you know, involved things like self-blame. Like there were many components, many people in my family who had like difficult relationships with each other and with me. And when I was able to sort of drop my reactivity, you know, and just engage from a place of self, the relationships around me kind of relaxed and improved as well. And I got counseling around that. It wasn't just IFS therapy. I did kind of like counseling, and my therapist he did IFS, but also family therapy, and was able to sort of show me perspectives from other people and things I hadn't thought about, and ask questions that were just so interesting. So really kind of like engaging with the difficult relationships in my family and in my life, that was one key component of my therapy. And it's about that. And also the fact that the book is about legacy burdens, because once I was able to recognize how trauma had impacted me and how it shaped parts of me in childhood, it made me look at my mom's childhood and then my grandmother's childhood. And I could see this chain of trauma and things that were never healed, never addressed, never brought into the light and acknowledge like how painful that was, how hard that was. I was taking my grandmother's experiences from World War II and grieving over them for the first time. You know, these events suddenly felt real to me. Like, how had this shaped my grandmother at 17, 18 with World War II breaking out? So I go into that in the book, and the idea of legacy burdens, which is in IFS, was so helpful. And my therapist actually helped draw that aspect out for me. You know, she was able to say, hold up, back up. Something happened to you at 17, and then something happened to your mom at 17. And then World War II broke out when your grandmother was like 17, turning 18. It was like not the same. but like a big trauma in each of our lives at this very like difficult age. And it was like, wow, what a coincidence. And she's like, no, that's a legacy burden. And it's something that you in therapy, you're addressing it. You're kind of cutting that chain of trauma because you're healing it. You're not going to pass this on to your daughter. And that was such a huge moment for me, really putting my own story in the context of history. And what a gift to sort of be able to give that to my daughter. Like, okay, I can't guarantee that the world's going to be okay and that things won't happen when you're 17, but hopefully you're not going to have to deal with like me putting my own healed trauma on you. So that was the lesson.
Yeah, I mean, and you represent that visually beautifully. Like it's like the middle of the book. There's this beautiful. They're not like chapters, but there's a section of legacy, and it's a beautiful illustration. You do such a good job of combining story and teaching. So there's these beautiful pictures of your mom and what she went through, and your grandmother, and I think even your great grandmother. Like there's a couple different generations in these stories and the beautiful pictures, and it's like, yeah, wow. When we see, what happened to you and your story. And then understand, your mom and this horrible traumatic thing that happened to her at 13. And yeah, it's just really beautiful. And how many of us either don't know that or don't recognize the impact of that, like the impact of, who I am now, how I'm raising my child now is in my parts, not just sort of what's happening externally, but what's happening internally is affected by legacy, what's happening in my family.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing that therapists kind of understand that needs to be out in the world. I feel like it needs to be kind of common knowledge where everybody has this reckoning where I was like, oh, look what happened to me, look what happened to my family. And it just changes things, it shifts things. And what you say about the book being a teaching book, thank you for noticing that. It's really a testament to my editor who, when I first met her, when I was trying to pitch the book and sell the book, my editor said, we really want to kind of like pull out IFS in this book and the body keeps the score. These are all like parts of your story. So we really want to platform that. And I was like, wow, she really gets it. I was thinking I'd have to go into this meeting kind of explaining what IFS was, but she was already there. And I also had like meetings, like production meetings with like the entire team at Avery Books. They also publish, just for reference, Gabor Mate's the Myth of Normal and like some of Brené Brown's work. So they really are clued in. But one of the people in my team sort of said, we all know somebody who's in IFS therapy right now. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. It didn't feel that way like 5 years ago when I started on this journey. So
yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I remember pitching my book to a publisher and she was like, what, like this defensive, like, what do you mean we don't have multiple personality disorder? And I remember this moment of like, wow, Dick had to sell this idea over and over and over again. And I just found myself like, oh, I haven't had to sell this. Like, like, okay, no, we just have these parts. And yeah, so it was an interesting moment that it's like, yeah, like in my world, it's easily explained, and it's getting more and more, with the popularity of IFS and with the Inside Out movie and just with, even your book being out there, that it's going to become this common language because IFS is it's like a character in the book, right? It's such a star of, of the book.
And my relationship to it as well, because I started off hearing protectors, exiles, firefighters, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. That sounds awful. And yeah, I really kind of like changed my mind to it when I discovered Tom Holmes's book, Parts Work. And that kind of explained it to me in this visual way. And so, and I include that in the book. So my book has lots of books in it, like lots of references to different books,
I love that. And I actually didn't know that. And I love Tom Holmes's book. And isn't it so funny and amazing because Tom Holmes has this illustrator. It wasn't Tom. It was his wife was a huge part of the book. And then he also has this illustrator, which I'm blanking on her name. But so it's amazing that, of course you are drawn to that book because there's this beautiful illustrations. So I loved that. And so, so you talk about, this sort of cultural burden of like, we don't go to therapy.
Mm-hmm. Especially in England where I'm from. So yeah. It was a hurdle. And also, you mentioned my previous book. So for those who don't know, I have a graphic novel series called Sky in Stereo, it was in 2 volumes. And that was about my psychiatric issues when I was 17. That was my legacy burden, right? And it's fiction. So I fictionalized my story. In my mind, it was like Sylvia Plath the Bell Jar, but done in comics, right? And so, sorry, I've lost my thread a little bit. Help me out.
We're talking about the legacy or the burden of like no therapy. Sort of the thread is sort of like IFS is kind of weird, but you even going to therapy. So sort of you started going to therapy, and then your first therapist introduced you to IFS, and you're like, no way,
right? Like, and that directly relates to the fact that when I had like psychiatric treatment when I was 17, it was awful and it felt kind of traumatizing. And so for me, like therapy and psychiatry were like connected, and I didn't realize how they were different. I had to kind of like learn how they were different. But I had like huge trust issues going into that. And I really thought to myself, like, how does even just talking about my problems with a stranger for a lot of money help? I didn't understand how it would help. And so a lot of my book is about going from the position where I'm very anti-therapy to being someone who's embraced it and wants to talk about it to everybody, which is where I'm at now. So
yeah, I love that. Because how many people are, right? That like you said, you're kind of demystifying therapy a little bit by like what you're putting out there in the world on social media, in this incredible new book that you have. You really do. I mean, you walk through, it's like we're looking, you're telling your story at the same time where, you're opening the door to your therapy session, and we're watching and listening and looking because it's a graphic novel. So we're seeing your therapist. And you do a great job we see sort of the beginning, kind of like the non-IFS-y, just straight up talk therapy. And we see that for a while mixed in with your story before we get introduced to IFS. And you have this amazing couple of pages where you teach what IFS is, and you're doing a great job with that. And then we start seeing your inner world, and you do a great job just sort of demonstrating, here's all my parts, and how you relate to them and how they talk to you. And yeah, it's so good.
Thank you so much. And that shining a light on the therapy process, that word process, my therapist would say that to me over and over again. It's a process. And it was the relationship with my therapist as well, Yeah. You can't put a price on that. And I'm so grateful that I was able to get his permission and to kind of like to show our therapy work together, because I do hope it's helpful to others. And I look at a lot of, if you look at how therapy is presented in pop culture, especially like in TV and movies, therapy is often used in this kind of comedic way. Like, you will see like a therapist who's kind of like bored and like filing on their nails or like looking at their phone. And it's maybe funny, but it's not actually how therapy is. You're actually there to do incredibly hard work. And that role of the therapist is someone who's like highly trained, who is able to sort of hold space. And especially in the terms of like IFS therapists, I mean, they've done their own work. And so they're helping their clients on a journey that they have been through themselves. And I think that is why IFS to me is so magical, because the people who you work with, they really know what they're talking about from the inside out. And it has kind of changed them too. And there were times in therapy sessions when I would be in the presence of my own self-energy. And when I finally opened my eyes, I could see kind of like a glow from my therapist. Like they were moved too. And you could see that their self was engaged with my work. And I could feel it in my heart. But when I opened my eyes, I could see like, oh, wow, you were right there with me on this journey. And I mean, that was something I hope to capture in the book. And hopefully I did,
Yeah, definitely. How is your family? I mean, I think you've been doing this for a while, but I'm curious how your family is responding to the book. And I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So part of the journey of making work about this, especially the very private stories from my mom and her history, I did actually ask permission and say, look, there's a point where your story becomes my story, and am I allowed to tell it? And she gave me permission, which was incredibly big of her, Yeah. And then I have half sisters from my dad's side of the family. I go into my dad's story. He's a very like troubled person, and he has children from like another marriage. And so it was a question of like asking their permission too, and saying like what's okay for me to share, what needs to be private. And the fact that people did trust me, but I think maybe being willing to have these conversations. I really couldn't have told this story without getting very disclosive about my own story, because I was showing like a healing process, and I needed the reader to be right there with me, understanding like, well, what are the components? What happened here? What's the personal history? And some of it was very difficult. It involves like incest and incarceration that happened in my family. A lot of things that happened around me, but not directly to me. And just before I started therapy, I didn't think I would ever be able to tell this story because growing up, it felt too shameful. And having shared this work online and read the comments of people who've engaged with my work, I realized like how far I am from being alone, unfortunately. But so many like dysfunctional families experience these huge traumas, and they are shrouded in shame and secrecy. And so realizing that what happened in my family speaks to like a bigger thread in society, that there's so much harm out there that needs to sort of be addressed and healed. And I feel that the first step of it is to actually acknowledge it. And so hopefully the fact that I was willing to sort of deal with my shame and start going public with this stuff. I mean, hopefully other people at least can acknowledge like this happened in my family and that was not okay, and it did me harm, or it harmed the people around me. And I think when we acknowledge things, we can start letting the light in and start letting things heal,
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it makes a lot of sense that you would have to work with some parts around that, right? The parts that are like, there is this legacy of secrecy, which I think that's in so many families, this legacy of secrecy. We don't talk about it. And so, you do a great job of telling a really engaging, sadly, super interesting story, but it's like, the detail, I think you do such a good job of telling us detail, but like not too much detail. So it's like, we know what happened, but it's not like so much detail that it's distracting, right? Or that so much, it's so much detail, but it seems like it's still careful that you're protecting. There's still some protection there. Like there's still some compassion for everyone involved. So you're telling some of it, but with compassion, so that there's not, you're not telling all of it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it really speaks to how something my therapist said to me was when I was talking about the events that happened to members of my family. And he pointed out to me that, Sacha, you can only ever do your own work. There is parts of other people in your family that you're starting to recognize as parts now, protective parts. And that's the work for them to do and heal. And so there was finding a point where, like, what is my story and, like, what's mine to tell? And where that's for somebody else to sort of tell that story. But, there are areas of overlap where somebody else's story, like, really impacted me in my life. And so that was mine to tell. So it was finding that very careful thread through the story. And I had an amazing editor who really helped me bring that into focus. I couldn't have done it without her. So.
Well, I think that's exactly what I felt. Like I felt that's a beautiful way of putting it, that, right, you are telling your story. And so, there's parts of me, I think, sort of maybe teenage parts, especially around one person in your family and your story, that I feel like part of me would probably wanted to have been a little meaner, maybe, or like something like maybe a little bit more, like, I don't know. Yeah, I can feel that. Like, you handled that really well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Having a therapist tell me that the part of me that was dealing with that was 12 years old. And to have like an adult who is this like wise, wonderful woman. I should point out I had two therapists in the story. So I changed therapists and then kind of go back to the first one. But this therapist said to me, like, what you were dealing with is difficult for an adult to deal with. And you were 12 years old dealing with that and trying to make sense of these crazy things that were happening in your family. And that was such a wonderful perspective. And so helpful to hear that. Like, it really helped those young parts of me to go, oh yeah, we're just kids. Like, this wasn't for us to fix,
Yeah.
Because I think for many years I'd carried this sense that, well, that was my fault somehow, which is so common, isn't it, amongst therapy clients.
Yeah. And I think even like, it's my fault that this is confusing, or it's my fault that's impacting my ability to do well at school, or to take care of my body, or to be like, not that you weren't functioning, but, there is so much happening around you that I agree that, like, even as me and as an adult, I'm like, this is really hard stuff. And then it felt like, you were having a hard time with it. And then it was a little bit of like, and I think this is so true for us, but then there's sort of blame for you that, like, you need to not have a hard time with this. Like, you need to sort of step in line and not have a hard time with it. And so I think there are parts of us, I mean, maybe I could speak for myself. I think there are parts of me that can then get confused, right? Like, oh, like, I'm having a hard time with the thing, But everyone around me is either pretending like they're not having a hard time or telling me I shouldn't be having a hard time. So then there ends up being a lot of confusion of like what's real or what's not. Like there's sort of a incongruent feeling of like, I'm having a feeling like something's wrong here, but externally people are acting like something's wrong with me for having that.
Right. Yes. Like these are me problems because everyone else is coping just fine. And, it's a story that we tell ourselves. I mean, I certainly tell myself. There's a chapter in my book called Therapy is for People with Real Problems. And there's a part of me who just can't handle the fact that I'm the one in therapy. And yet all these things in my family happen to other people. Like, why do I need therapy? I should be fine. And it was a part that had a very scornful voice. But when I was able to kind of relax and kind of really get in touch with that part, we found a part underneath it who had been so silenced for so long. And when that silenced part was allowed to like come in and unburden, and the scornful part had been watching it, and she was like, wow, that was really hard. That was really bad. So this scornful part softened and really kind of like took on like self-energy and was kind to me. So it's moments like that, which I hope I captured in the book, where I show that IFS is kind of multidimensional. You're working with different ages of yourselves and your whole self, like all in one session. And you've got like a therapist there guiding you, is shining this compassion at you. I hope everybody who reads the book at least gets a little curious about IFS, because it can help a person not only heal trauma, but just deal with, like anxiety about public speaking. You can work with that part of you. There are so many ways in which you can kind of like use IFS to sort of improve your life and just get in good relationship with yourself. So I hope that the book at least makes people curious about IFS. And if they're in therapy, maybe trying IFS as a modality to sort of help them with their own personal work.
I love that. And I think that you, because it's visual, I'm thinking of like on one page, I can see, like you demonstrate exactly what you're talking about, right? Like I can see it. Like you're not just writing it out like words. I can see an image of you, and I can see, let's say, 3 or 4 parts of you, like that's all drawn out, and I can see your therapist there. Like, so you do such a great job of this visual representation of like what's happening in the room externally and then what's happening inside of you. Like there's nothing else like that. Like I can talk about it, you and I can talk about it, but to see that visually is just a huge gift.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's kind of a wonderful thing that I was a cartoonist and able to use this skill set I had with my own personal therapy work, which has actually become part of my comics work. Because comics can like show you, it can give you the voice in your head with the written word, and it can also show you like visually, like exactly what's happening kind of like inside and out. So I don't think there's any other medium I could have told this story in. It had to be a comic book,
Yeah. I have to say, for people that are like, well, I don't read comics, or I don't read graphic novels like me either, right? Like I read all the time. I read, fiction books, pop fiction, like whatever everybody's reading. That's what I have a part that's like, I want to read what everybody's reading. And so, but I'm gobbling this up. Like really, it's I can't. It's so good.
Thank you so much. And I think part of that is generational, because I think, I'm like in my late 40s now, and growing up, there weren't a lot of comics kind of for me. There were superheroes, or there were action comics for boys, or romance comics, but that wasn't my thing. And so actually the fact that now there are comics which are like memoir and histories and all different kinds of genres. So this comics medium is wonderful for that. And if anybody wants any recommendations, just hit me up on social media, because I will gladly recommend more comics if this gives you a taste for reading graphic novels and graphic memoirs.
I think I'm going to have to do that, because I'm like, because I'm really visual. So I'm enjoying this, not just because IFS, I'm really enjoying it, obviously.
Oh, good. There's some wonderful ones out there. And, it's such a unique form because everybody's art style is different. And so each one is a unique experience. So,
yeah. I think you and I were emailing back and forth, and I got teary when I got your book, because I was like, I remember us talking about this. Like I remember when it was just, just in quotes, like memes, or just sort of, strips on Instagram.
Yeah, just little webcomics. Yeah.
Yeah. And to turn it into a book that's just, it just feels like, wow, this is like a dream come true. So I just, yeah.
Thank you so
Amazing.
much. And it really is. I mean, the IFS community sort of made this happen because they supported my work. And yeah, it was very unexpected. Like I said, I started therapy, and in the very first session, I told my therapist a very short history, condensed history of what happened in my family. And I told him I was a cartoonist, that I'd written a graphic novel. And he was like, oh, that family history you just told me, that should be a book. How many people could relate to that? And I was like, you're crazy. I will never tell that story. Here I am. 5 years later. That was 2017. So that's 7 years later. This book is coming out into the world, and I'm so happy to share it. So yeah, isn't that funny what therapy can do?
It's amazing. So, is there what's next for you? Yeah, what's next?
Well, this book is going to come out on October the 15th. And I'm working on a young adult graphic novel, a fictional book. I've actually got to sort of make money as a cartoonist now, right? Because I quit my job in the library, and then this book deal came along. So this has given me some money for a little while, but I really need to sort of think ahead about how, if I'm going to be an author, I need to make books that will sell. And so I've got a young adult book in the works, which I'm kind of excited about. And that kind of covers some religious trauma. It also covers therapy, but from a teen point of view. My daughter is, like we said, my daughter is 15 now. So I thought, well, I've got like a teenager. So this is like the prime time to sort of write about teenagers, because I have like a bird's eye view into like the life of a teenager right now. So, so I've got that. I've also got like a graphic novel called Strange Kind of Love, which I started back in 2016 and had to put on the back burner while I was doing this therapy book. So that's going to be moved to a front burner at some point. So I'm just hopefully going to keep the books coming. That's the plan. Yeah. And I'm still doing webcomics. So if people want to check out my social medias, I still put out little vignettes. I'm not in therapy anymore, but I still like engage a lot with my own parts work, and still have stories to tell on that. So
yeah, I mean, you put out, I think I sent you a message about this, but you put out something a couple weeks ago about drinking. And I was like, and the way you put it out, it's like a teaching, it's a story and it's teaching, and it's a little bit about you, but I'm also as the reader, like, like it helped me, it invited me to be curious about my own parts and my own system. And I think that's what you do, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And it really is like therapy may have like ended for now. I may go back to therapy at some point because it's always there for me, right? But I'm entering like different seasons of life like all the time. And sort of IFS, that parts work, is that tool that I kind of like still need to sort of check in, like, how am I doing? How am I being a friend to myself right now? And so the IFS doesn't stop even though therapy has stopped. So it's still something I engage with. You mentioned I have a book with Gina Catanzaro called Unburdened Eating, and I did the illustrations for that. And I hope to like work with her some more in the future. And so I think I'm always going to be kind of involved with IFS and doing illustrations for that community in some form or another. But I also have, like I said, fiction is one of my passions, and I want to tell more fiction stories. So
how can people find out more about you?
Well, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook, Sacha Mardou. I'm on Instagram. It's Mardou_draws. You can just also Google IFS Comics and you'll find me. So yeah, I have a website called IFScomics.com. and another website called Mardouville. And if you go to Penguin Random House, you'll also find my book there. So
perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this, and it's so good to see you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you left a rating, a review, a like, comment, share with your family, your friends. That would mean so much to me. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or on Amazon. You can visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, or you can download a free Get to Know a Should part of you. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and at The One Inside on Facebook and on YouTube. Jeff Schrum co-produces The One Inside, and I am forever grateful for Jeff. Also thankful for Jack Reardon for creating the music, and just thank you for listening. 6 seasons, over 1 million downloads. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you in this community. I'll see you next time.